Right, there's the beep. So we're recording. So morning, guys. For everyone at home watching this, welcome to ATCM's Blueprint for Resilience series, part of a response to COVID-19. For this particular session, we are talking about the economic impact of COVID-19 and what that means for high streets and town centres. Again, another fabulous panel to discuss this today. So let's introduce each of you. Lisa, do you want to go first? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, so I'm Lisa Carlson, Chief Exec of the Business Improvement District in Canterbury, and also chair the South East Network for the ATCM.
Fab. And David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm from Belfast City Centre Management and Project Manager there.
Fab. And Ian, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, good morning. Ian Ferguson, Partnerships for Better Business. We're a bid consultancy when we develop and manage bids around the UK.
Okay, so each of the topics we've tackled so far, be it what's happening socially, what's happening in terms of technology, what's happened politically, they're all big topics. But I have to say, given the news we've had this morning, which has sort of taken me back a bit, this might just be the biggest topic. So what I'm going to try to do actually is I'm just going to bring in some information from both Ireland and the UK. So bear with me while I get the screen up. Right, so can you all see this screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're looking at here, so this is something which came out from the Irish Central Bank literally just about a month ago, and that gives an indication as to where we were heading economically in Ireland. So they were suggesting then that a fall in GDP of over 8%, which is massive. And looking at the sector breakdown for Ireland, some of the industries which are hurting, unfortunately, it looks like almost inevitably, they are the industries which are most important to town centres. And it all looks pretty damaging. It all looks pretty damaging. And the big news, I think, which has hit this morning is the news from the Bank of England, who have put together some forecast, some statistics based on what they've seen so far, and what they are projecting for the second quarter of 2020 is a 25% decrease in GDP. So that's a 25% drop in our economic activity across the UK. It hasn't happened apparently since, I think, 17th, 18th century. So that is absolutely massive. Absolutely massive. And when you look at different activity streams across the economy, everything is a cliff edge, and it's huge. It's absolutely huge. So I just wanted to firstly get an impression from you guys of what you think about the scale of the change economically we are seeing. So Lisa, I'll start with you. What do you think about the scale of the economic change?
Well, we were just talking about, I'm sure we've all been involved in different kind of recovery planning meetings locally, regionally, nationally, and we've had those discussions at the ATCM as well. One of the things we've been talking about is, for example, once furlough ends, we know we're going to start to see redundancies and unemployment rise. So I think that's part of this picture. For us in Canterbury, well, we also know that probably in terms of sectors that are going to be hit the hardest, it will be local authorities and higher education, and everyone. And we are a university city. We think we have the highest ratio of students to local population in the whole of the UK. And so when we start to think about all of that and what it means for recovery planning, it's really significant. And with the discretionary funding that was announced last week, and we've had to engage in those conversations with the local authority, that's going to be really, really difficult. It's almost an impossible judgment to make about where that money should go. But the recovery conversations are very much, this is 12, 18 months, 2 years. This is the conversation we're having. But what I don't think those conversations have factored in yet is how significant the economic impact and the recession will be. So when we start to see, we've talked about retail, hospitality and leisure sectors, about how difficult that's going to be and what reopening might look like. But what about business and professional services when they start to reopen and furlough ends? So very much on our minds is what that unemployment and community safety impact is going to be. So I think this is all really significant, and I think we're all still grappling to get our heads around it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, a lot of the recovery planning so far, it's difficult because we've got such a big level of uncertainty, because we've still got a health crisis happening, which dovetails with the economic crisis. And without understanding where the health crisis takes us, we then can't understand what the economic impact is. But I think, I mean, I've discussed this recently with other people. It sounds like the airlines industry is saying 2, 3, 4, possibly even 5 years before they fully recover. So, I mean, that's the level of uncertainty we're looking at. Ian, can I bring you in? What do you think about the scale of the impact of COVID-19 on our economy?
Well, certainly, obviously dramatic, and it's going to be a permanent scar on the economy. I mean, the bank also does anticipate a fairly rapid recovery, but on the other hand, they also say that the outlook for the economy is unusually uncertain. So I'm not quite sure how they could come up with a rapid recovery when they're also saying it's unusually uncertain. I think it will, there's a big question mark about the ability for businesses and business people to get their heads around what and how they respond to recovery, what they're able to do in practical terms. Their business models will, particularly in some sectors such as hospitality, will have to change dramatically, and that sort of thing will have then an impact upon visitor numbers to town and city centres. And tourism is built around the ability for people to go to places that have tours and guides and groups of people, where there's also then experimenting with new foods or enjoying food as part of that experience of the leisure experience of a visitor to a town or city centre. So it'll have all sorts of impacts that I just don't think we can predict at the moment. And I think it comes down to the ability to instill confidence in people to visit places that have been traditionally very crowded places, and the ability for businesses to actually think about new ways of dealing with a situation where at the moment we've got to have physical distancing and limited numbers of people. Will restaurants, for example, be able to deal with or have a business that relies on a third of the covers that they currently have built their business around? So that's a big question mark. And
I mean, that's a massive question mark, isn't it? David, I think it'd be good to actually bring you in here. So I've been to Belfast. I love Belfast. It is a city transformed. It's amazing. And you've got a great leisure and hospitality sector, but from those leisure and hospitality operators, is there a feeling of trepidation about a potentially new business model whereby they're seeing significantly less volume coming through the doors because they would have, we all expect they will have to respect physical distancing?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges going forward. And I suppose the biggest challenge is job protection.
Yeah.
Overall GDP is a nice figure, but it's the rate of unemployment is probably the crucial one for domestic demand.
Yeah.
There could be some very interesting rebalancing of the economy, particularly to help the hospitality sector. For lots of small hospitality sectors, their rent is exponentially their most expensive cost. If rents drop, the business then is much more viable with reduced coverage. or reduced covers. So there is an ability to manage the reopening of hospitality if rents become much more realistic. The trend has been so far that rents are based largely on footfall. It's not the only metric. To a large extent, it is whatever they can get away with. But your out-of-town hospitalities, rents and rates are dramatically reduced from town centres. If that footfall starts to drop, their ability to charge that rent shouldn't be as high. Therefore, the businesses can open and make less profit. And I suppose the second one is people's expectation of profitability in businesses. Is trying to reset the expectation that actually having more people employed and making slightly less profit will see them through the short term. If you have very profitable industries that or only 10% of the population are making decent money, the rest of the economy goes to crap. And I think the furlough scheme has been brilliant at keeping some ability for people to pay their bills. And there may be some pent-up demand going out of that. And it's how we transition out of the furlough scheme will probably have the biggest impact in the short term. Long term, I think landlords will have to take massive haircuts on their businesses, because how are they going to attract people in at the current rents?
Yeah, right. I think you've touched on two really big points there, which I want to explore a little bit deeper. And it almost goes to the heart of what a sort of capitalist economy looks like. So the way I understand an economy like ours is that it's all about the liquidity of capital and the flow, the distribution of money throughout sectors, throughout geographies, to make an economy work. And there's two issues I think we've picked up already, where you can see what a challenge that is going to be going forward. Firstly, if we have major challenges in the employment of people, and those people then cannot spend, and the knock-on impact for the economy is absolutely huge. So actually things like the furloughing scheme and how that works going forward, and our ability to employ people going forward is going to be, it's going to be a massive, it's going to have a massive knock-on impact. I'm just going to bring in a couple of other slides here as well, because I think they're quite important to take a look at. So again, this is the Irish Central Bank. So the most important row is the last one, the unemployment rate, where they are predicting a jump of unemployment of 5.5% in the first quarter to 24.7% in the second quarter, and then for it to begin to head back down again, but still only reaching a massive 10.5% by the final quarter of this year. So that's still double what it would have started with. Now that is absolutely massive. And we look here at the Bank of England as well, so you can see just this steep incline. So they're projecting for the second quarter in the UK unemployment of just shy of 10%. Surely that's going to have a massive impact on the economy. At least I'll bring you in. What do you think about the knock-on impact of employment levels?
Well, we've been hearing a lot about the importance of public health and focusing on that. And in terms of the recovery planning, it's got to be a health first approach. But it is absolutely to do with physical and mental health. It's also to do with economic health and environmental health. The thing is, we've been picking up in some areas, and it's absolutely right that we have to focus on the NHS and what the NHS needs, full stop. However, I think it's impossible to separate, as we enter into this recovery phase, health, physical health, economic health, and environmental health, because if the unemployment rate goes up as we expect it to, even if that's in the short term, the impact of that on real people so the impact on businesses and the people who work in them and run them, and they can no longer afford to pay their rent, or they can no longer, we've been talking about their spend in the economy, but this is going to circle back around to a health impact. So it is all completely intertwined. And that's why, and I don't think any of us have the answer, the absolute right answer. But we can't separate one from the other. And that's why it's so important to focus on economic recovery and how that links to everything else. We need to do everything we can that's right to support the economy and to support our businesses. Now, how we navigate that is complicated, but it's absolutely linked. The issues around unemployment are linked to health, and we have to consider them together, I think.
That's actually a really, really powerful point. So it's in previous iterations of this discussion, we have actually discussed how health and economy are intertwined, but in a very different way. So it's been about if we don't deal with the issue of the virus, then there will be some people who choose not to engage in the economy. And so if you don't sort out the health implications, we don't have a fully functioning economy anyway. I haven't even thought of it about the other side, where if you don't have a thriving economy, then whether it's mental health or other forms of health, you then have a buildup of other health issues. There's clearly a symbiotic relationship between the two, which I'd not actually considered. Ian, what do you think about the issue of employment, consumer behavior, and even its links to health?
Well, I think Lisa's absolutely right that I think the links to health and the economy are so intertwined now. I think that potentially there's going to be a massive social cost if we don't address this in some shape or form, which of course then comes back to a massive cost on health service, social services, and other provisions. Which were already lacking and straining at the seams before COVID-19 came along. To me, I think we have to reassess the value. You mentioned the capitalist economy or the liquidity of capital. I think there are two big blocks actually, which are related to releasing the way we assess business value. We've heard a lot in this COVID-19 crisis about putting people first. Good businesses put people first, and I think there are two big blocks for me. One is the way we assess property value, and asset value has been sort of sits there on the books of landlords, and in many cases has created permanently vacant property units in town and city centres, simply to make sure that the balance sheet looks healthy. And somehow we've got to break this cycle of the way we assess property values, because that's the sort of locking up a property for nobody's benefit. But also I think the other big block is the way in which the tax is applied to property, the business rates issue. That actually interferes with the ability to be flexible in town and city centres. So, okay, the one constraint is planning use, but also the other constraint is business rates. And going back to what David was saying earlier on, if hospitality is saddled with a massive business rates bill before they can even start thinking about opening the doors, then of course that's going to have an impact upon, if you reduce the covers, it's not about necessarily being able to employ more waiters and waitresses, but actually it's simply to be able to pay the business rates on reduced covers. So business rates could go a long way to solve it. If that problem could be solved, I think that would go a long way to helping flexibility of use of property in the high street, innovative ideas coming in, which we need now. We need people with creative ideas that will actually create new uses for property, but actually also attract people and drive businesses and therefore drive employment. And I also think there is a link with certainly the way we assess property value as against valuing people and skill sets, and that in turn social value. So I think there's some serious questions to ask here.
Yeah, I mean, there is, isn't there? So again, we've almost got these sort of two things we're looking at. That is the impact on people as employees, which affects their levels of consumption, which impacts on the potential health of businesses, but also then issues like our property industry, our tax framework, some of those structural systemic issues, which we also need to take a look at. David, I'm going to bring you back in, but just before we move on, I just want to show you another slide, which we see here the impact of COVID-19 in terms of whether this is people just simply not engaging in the economy, whether this is a direct impact of lockdown, whether this is about people being fearful about the amount of money in their pocket and that drop in consumer confidence. But here is some data provided by ONS and Visa on consumer spending released today. And it's a massive drop, isn't it? I think, David, what do you think the impact of the high street is from this dramatic change in consumer spending? And also, do you think that this is something that might impact high streets permanently, even when we start to relax the restrictions on lockdown?
Yeah, I suppose the key metric which is rarely reported on, is disposable income. With the furlough scheme paying 80% of people's salary capped at 2.5, that 20% loss, if there is a loss, not everybody would be over the 2.5. If that's actually their disposable income, there is no money left to spend. That's really the key metric. So regardless of what people's salaries are, it's reducing the overall structural spend to leave disposable is what drives the economy. At the minute, everything's weighted towards property. Your own house, your rent, property taxes, business rates, etc. That doesn't circulate the money around the economy. It just moves it into the hands of quite a few people. The reduction in business rates is often talked about. However, what we have found is if rates go down, business rents go up. The two of them have to go hand in hand. Yeah. There was some interesting information coming out of Austria on just how much of the city itself is actually owned by the state or subsidised. To try and put caps on that to stop prices, land values getting out of hand. They changed the legislation a number of years ago where a certain amount of it had to be affordable or subsidised. I think it was 70%. Land prices dropped overnight, but it's actually led the economy to take off. That's the big thing. And I think where we end up, business rates are likely to disappear over the longer term. With the rise of online, that whole metric of business rates doesn't really work. It doesn't capture it. So whether it's an online tax to try and recover it, or if people start working from home, the individual property taxes go up. That's likely to happen to try and, because the tax take ultimately will need to be the same. However, is that a good thing for the town centres? Probably, because from an atmosphere, things to go, places to do, having lots of smaller businesses that can promote different flavours, different activities, would drive more people into the city centre. Over the longer term, I think a lot of the city centres are driven by the office economy. How many businesses are going to go back to tower blocks and having all their employees in the city centre working? Early indications are a lot of businesses are starting to revalue how that works. So even the sort of guidance around lockdown of maybe people are in for 4 days and working from home for 10, that's going to take 40, 50, maybe 60% of the footfall out of the city centre, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. That's going to have a huge impact. There's been very little coming through about when the departments are going to start bringing the public sector back in. So the nature of the high street is going to change dramatically very, very quickly. It's how best and what decisions they can make to protect the economy and protect people's employment. But ultimately, if people aren't earning enough to have disposable income, it's just going to decimate the economy.
Thanks for the positivity. Luckily, David, I am often known as the prophet of doom. So unfortunately, there's too much in there that I actually agree with. And I think this is a question I had for actually a little later in the conversation, but David, you've teased it out. I'm just going to go with it now. Is there any scenario, thinking about the impact on government and tax revenue, is there any scenario now where our public finances are in any sort of reasonable shape within the next 2-3 years? Because I think David's right. Either the government goes big and has to continue to provide sustained funding for everyone to keep things going because of the multiple impacts, or there can be no change and you will see tax revenue dry up anyway, because you'll see mass unemployment. You will see businesses starting to decamp from their traditional economic clusters as more people start to work from home. These changes are going to have surely massive impact on government finances. I'll bring you in, Lisa. What do you think?
If you're the prophet of doom, I'm going to interject some hope, but I think, I think the government has to go big. I don't see another way around that. And, just even thinking about the situation in Canterbury and some of the conversations we're going to have with our new virtual committee system. We're trying to work out how we can engage with council decision making. I'm sure everyone is trying to do that. And we've got a list of things that we know might be delayed indefinitely or just postponed for a while. So it's a really uncertain and it's unknown. I don't think any of us know how that's going to work out, but I don't see a scenario where we get through this without government continuing to go big. The bit of hope I wanted to interject isn't quite related to that, but it's just a comment that during lockdown we've seen a lot of innovation and creativity. So if we've seen that through lockdown, then surely we're going to see that through recovery. We just don't know what it looks like. And that might sound like wishful thinking. I am really worried about what's going to happen over the next few years. But it is more just a comment on what we're actually seeing. And I don't think we know what the high street's going to look like in the next few years. It's going to change dramatically. But I think we're also going to see some of that creativity and innovation coming through in this next phase.
Yeah, I agree with that. Thanks for being the rainbow of the group. I absolutely agree with that. I think the discussions we had about social changes and technological changes, innovation and creativity were core themes for both. Ian, what do you think about the sort of fiscal impact on government moving forward because of COVID-19? What do you think government finances look like, and how does that impact government policy going forward for the UK?
Well, I think they've got to be fleet of foot because if they don't act quickly, they'll get themselves into a real hole which should be very, very difficult to get out of. And I think, this procrastination that's been going on about business rates for the last God knows how many years is one example of where now they actually need to grasp this, because coming back to the point I was making earlier, and certainly Lisa is absolutely correct in terms of creativity. The innovation and creativity will only start to be realized and translate into a financial benefit if these blocks that exist in town and city centres, like big weights of business tax around property, are released. And I think if things go to things like turnover tax, which actually then is reflective of the economic activity, that is a way of sort of creating a fiscally neutral tax regime, but also a way of stimulating spend. And actually, I think trying to think about ways in which we can encourage businesses to employ more people. So if for example, a restaurant is paying less on business tax, and picking up on David's point, this sort of property value and business tax have to go hand in hand. You can't sort of start jacking up rents because property tax goes down. So there has to be some way of balancing that, so that the spend can go on to increasing numbers of people employed, and margins for the business then are reflected maybe in better customer service, a better experience for people who will then want to actually buy more of that experience. So then you start generating more turnover of transactions, which then translate into more transactional turnover tax. So I think that it's that sort of approach is getting away from these big blocks of tax. It's being much more fluid with the approach of how government manage taxation, and encourage creativity to be translated into people employed and better customer experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know whether this is good news or bad news, but yesterday the government announced for England that it's cancelling or postponing the business rates revaluation for 2021. Now, we do know for the UK government, it was in Boris Johnson's manifesto that business rates reform was on the cards. So we have to wait and see. I think, is there anybody that says no change in terms of the tax framework would be fine, or are we all agreed that some level of change is now needed? Yeah, absolutely. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. I'm just going to bring in another slide actually, because I just want to show you something on what the Bank of England see as the impact being on investments, business investment on a number of sectors. And when you see at the top things like accommodation and food and real estate and wholesale and retail, they're all issues which impact our industry. They're all issues which impact our industry at the top of the list. And I think we do need that change in terms of the structure, the financial structure of our industry, to make sure it can thrive in the future. And I think property ownership is it's a challenging one as well. So I think more flexibility with rates would absolutely be ideal. But also I do get the point that for some landlords themselves, they will be hurting as much as everyone else. And that this will have a knock-on impact on them and their ability to invest in their town centres. So it's how we can take that sort of broader approach to make sure we can take everybody with us on a journey. I think moving on to some of the other impacts then. So we know this is going to be massively disruptive for government fiscal policy. What about at a more local level? What is the impact on our local authorities who have to manage town centres, on our bids, on our town centre partnerships of all forms? David, I'll bring you in on this one. What do you think the financial impact is for our industry?
Horrendous. It will be interesting to see where the landing page is regarding the local structures. A lot of them seem to be relatively inefficient, and there's probably an element of a lot more of the bids in town centre management should really become a function within government, but under the same guidelines where they're actually paying the salaries. There's a lot of work bids and town centre managers do that government isn't capable of doing, but to actually safeguard those jobs, I think is relatively important, and for that to happen relatively quickly. The local authorities themselves, depending how long this goes on for, what rates relief they actually offer to businesses in the short to medium term. A lot of them, obviously England's very different because councils are much more for the local authority, whereas Ours isn't quite there. So a lot of the infrastructure spending is still performed by the departments. But councils really have a duty to do as much as they can to rebuild the city centre in a sustainable way. That's where they get the majority of their income from. How they're actually going to do that, I don't know. Their ability to talk to business consumers has always been relatively poor. And that's where bids and town centre managers have really stepped to the fore. And I think that should probably move back into local authorities, but in a bigger way. A lot more strategic, but still having that face-to-face. Let's go out to talk to people. However, the big challenge within that then is the accountability at local authority level. How many councillors involved and how does that become political rather than actually what works? Let us provide the advice and you decide to a certain extent. There are challenges around that. Hopefully bids, town centre management will thrive during this, that people really see the value that we're bringing. You know, the place management coming out of this, on a staggered lockdown, how you manage public space, the intricacies of how that works would naturally sit within town centre and bid management and getting those conversations going. I would worry about the finances of all bids. On town centre managers, like we would be core funded for about 40% of our income, so we're facing 60% drop. I'm sure the bids are the ones I've been talking to are projecting 50% loss of income this year and probably 50% next year. Does that change what the bids do? That it becomes much more recovery led, strategic planning and talking to business rather than what really should be devolved back to the local authorities for cleaner, safer, brighter. That should really sit within them in the short term. Bids were there to provide additionality. If councils are trying to convince people it's safe to come back into the city centre, that street cleansing, that safety really should fall within them and release a lot of the bids budgets to work on the stuff that we're best placed to do.
That's really interesting. So a potential change in the relationship you see where maybe councils pick up some of the operational issues around a recovery in terms of making a town centre safe, but for bids to be focused on creating that bridge, that strategic bridge with businesses in terms of that facilitation and that discussion. I think what will certainly happen is, given how finances are evolving and as we accustom to the new environment, the relationship between bids and councils will change, hopefully for the better. Lisa, what do you think?
I think this is a huge challenge, and we don't know the answers yet, but it kind of, I think it's a real principles and practicalities conversation right now, because the principle of what a bid should do is, yes, additionality, but also to be able to provide that private sector independent voice. And that's the really important bit, because what we see time and time again is that we add another perspective. And so for me, the number of times I show up at our local authority committee meeting and bring other businesses along to that makes a massive difference in how we engage in that decision-making process. And I think that's really the most important thing. It's hard to say that because, of course, the money we invest, the levy payer money we invest, is what that's the money they're giving to us, and that's also so important. But I think it's providing that voice, and I think that's the bit that really needs to be top priority. So that's the principle of it. The practicality, I mean, you know, we're one of the lucky ones. We sent our bills out in October. But we still have to face the same issue everyone else is facing soon enough. So how we survive this, I don't know. What the new relationship with the local authority is going to be, I don't know. We have a good working relationship. I think all we can do now is the next right thing, and keep the engagement going with our levy payers in whatever way we can, and engage with our local authority, county authority, and also all the work that's going on nationally. So the work that the ATCM is doing, Bid Foundation, British Bids, and that collaboration there, and the engagement then with MHCLG and Treasury. We have to keep that going, because we don't have the answer. We don't know what the new model is, but we just have to keep doing the next great thing to figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the first discussion we had as part of Blueprint for Resilience, I can't remember who was it that coined the phrase. It might have been Simon Pickeefley, but I think he said something like, we need leadership, not necessarily answers, which I think is a fair comment. And it's weird from David and Lisa, from what you've both said, and I agree with this. This is probably the biggest challenge our industry has ever faced. At the same time, has there ever been a point in our industry's young history where it's ever been as important as it is now?
Nope.
And you think on the basis of that, on the basis of the importance of our industry in terms of playing a pretty fundamental role in the economic recovery, that surely there is a role for us. Surely it will survive. It will have to survive, because you can't see an economic recovery happening at any kind of scale or speed if we allow bids to fail, or if councils aren't doing town or city centre management. Ian, I'll bring you in for the final comment on what you think about the prospects for our industry in this.
Well, I think in many respects it probably highlights the need for town centre partnerships and town centre management and business improvement districts as mechanisms to represent business voice and indeed an increasing residential population within town and city centres that not necessarily being covered by anybody, to actually play their role in actually working collaboratively, but also driving the agenda on what needs to be done in town and city centres. This issue of leadership is crucial, because we see those places that are successful have a sense of direction, which everyone is signed up to, and everyone is actually pressing their foot on the accelerator, because everyone has a role to play in, and we'll see different opportunities at different times. We shouldn't just be saying, oh, the local authority needs to lead on this or leads on everything, because they can't, and they won't necessarily identify those opportunities. So it is about working together as a team from different approaches, different aspects of life, to make sure that the town and city centres in the future will be vibrant and exciting places to visit, work in and invest in the future. And that will only come about by everyone playing a role. It's not just about the local authorities, which will only ever come at it from one perspective. As much as they try and take a global approach, they are bound by the bureaucracy of government, and therefore it does need other partners to come in and work together alongside, and everyone play their part in building the new future.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and a really good point to leave it on. We're just coming up to time, so guys, thank you very much. You've been absolutely brilliant. It's been another fascinating discussion, a little bit grim to begin with, but you've helped me to lift my spirits and send me into my bank holiday weekend with maybe a little bit of hope in my heart. So thanks a lot, guys. You've been great, and I will catch up with you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.